It was supposed to be just another Christmas party until my own family reminded me why I kept my success to myself. The annual Whitaker family holiday bash was held at Aunt Caroline's sprawling estate outside Savannah. The chandeliers sparkled, the bourbon flowed, and the conversation hovered somewhere between bragging and polite judgment. I stood by the dessert table, quietly sipping sparkling water from a vintage coupe glass, watching my cousin Blake bask in the spotlight near the grand piano. He was always the golden boy, former Capitol Hill intern, Ivy League grad, now droning on about his big promotion at a tech firm, Altair Digital. Then came the predictable jab. So Rachel Uncle Mike said with a tight smile, still running that little, strategy shop. His words dripped with condescension, and Blake didn't miss his cue to pile on. Still working out of coffee shops, he laughed, adjusting his cufflinks like he was in a Rolex ad. I could probably talk to my boss, get you a real job, something steady. You're 36 now, right? I smiled politely, swallowing the urge to spill the truth right then and there that my little firm Crestview Strategies was actually in the final stages of acquiring the very company Blake worked for. But not tonight. Let them laugh. Let them smirk. The quiet cousin they'd all overlooked was about to rewrite the whole family narrative, and they wouldn't see it coming. Blake always did love an audience, especially one that didn't know better. Just as Aunt Caroline's third tray of crab-stuffed mushrooms made the rounds, and Bing Crosby crooned softly through the surround sound, Blake raised his glass and cleared his throat like he was announcing a State of the Union address. Well, folks, he said, flashing that signature grin he probably practiced in the mirror, big news on my end. The merger between Stratascorp and Altair Digital is nearly finalized. And guess who's been tapped to lead the Southeast Division? A chorus of impressed gasps rose from the room. Uncle Hank clapped him on the back with a proud grunt. My mother gave a polite smile, though I caught the flicker of envy in her eyes. Blake soaked in the admiration like a man on stage. The lights were on him, and he didn't plan on stepping off anytime soon. I'll be overseeing post-merger, restructuring, streamlining legacy systems, and get this spearheading a total rebrand of Altair's digital infrastructure. He added, adjusting his tie with one hand and cradling his bourbon in the other. It's a bold move, but hey, someone's got to lead the charge, right? Aunt Caroline beamed at him as if he'd just been knighted. That's my boy, always destined for greatness, and I suppose you'll be relocating to Atlanta, someone asked. Possibly, Blake replied in a tone that practically screamed executive. But they've made it clear wherever I go I'm leading. Michael Liu, the CEO, he and I are becoming quite close. In fact, he's stopping by tonight. More gasps. Someone dropped a cocktail napkin. Michael Liu, Aunt Caroline repeated, clutching her pearls. The CEO of Altair Digital is coming here. Yup, Blake said, swirling his drink like a Bond villain. We've been talking shop all week. After this merger, we'll practically be family. I stood quietly off to the side, my drink growing warm in my hand. Blake hadn't once looked my way. Since the party started, not really. But that didn't stop him from throwing jabs my direction whenever he could. You know, Rachel, he said, finally turning his attention toward me, his voice low but smug. You should meet Michael. Maybe he can help you find something more stable. That freelance thing you do, it's got to be exhausting, right? No benefits, no team, no structure. You're 36 now, aren't you? Stability's important. A few cousins tittered. Aunt Caroline cast me a sympathetic glance, like I was the family's resident cautionary tale. I felt the familiar ache in my chest, the one that always showed up at these gatherings, the one that reminded me I'd spent a decade building something no one in that room respected because it didn't come with a corporate title or a nameplate on a corner office door. but I didn't flinch. "Appreciate the offer, Blake," I said calmly, keeping my voice level, "but I'm doing just fine." He gave a theatrical shrug, turning his back to me, as the room leaned in closer to hear him predict the next big tech trends, misquote stock valuations, and explain the difference between AI strategy and actual innovation. What none of them knew, what Blake would soon find out, is that Michael Liu wasn't coming to see him. He was coming for me. And I wasn't just attending the merger. I was the merger. There's a silence that happens in a room not from absence of sound, but from the sudden collapse of assumptions. At precisely 8:30 p.m., the front doors of Aunt Caroline's estate swung open with the kind of quiet drama you see in movies. Conversations hushed mid-sentence. Blake, already 2 bourbons deep, stood a little taller. He straightened his collar, then turned to the group and flashed his most practiced grin. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "prepare to be impressed." And then he walked in, Michael Liu, the CEO of Altair Digital, the man Blake had been name-dropping all evening like he was his college roommate. He stepped across the threshold in a tailored charcoal coat, silver hair perfectly groomed, and the kind of calm, commanding presence that made people stand a little straighter without realizing it. He was flanked by 2 associates, but his eyes scanned the room as if he was looking for someone specific. Then he saw me. He smiled, and without so much as a glance at Blake, he walked directly across the room, cutting through the crowd of stunned relatives like a man with a purpose. "Miss Whitaker," he said warmly, extending his hand. "It's good to see you again. Are we still on for tomorrow morning?" The silence hit like a thunderclap. A glass clinked awkwardly in the background. Someone dropped a shrimp skewer. Blake's face froze mid-smirk. "Absolutely," I said, meeting his gaze with a nod, looking forward to finalizing everything. Aunt Caroline gasped. Uncle Hank's drink paused halfway to his mouth. Blake blinked like he'd missed a cue. You 2 know each other?" he asked, voice suddenly brittle. Michael looked at Blake, clearly confused. "Of course we do," he replied. "Rachel's the reason I'm here tonight." More silence, the kind that swallows a room whole. She's the one who acquired Altair Digital. Michael said, his voice calm and matter-of-fact, as though he'd just mentioned the weather. You could have heard a snowflake fall. Blake's bourbon glass slipped slightly in his hand. Aunt Caroline reached for the buffet table to steady herself, and I just smiled. "It's not possible." Blake murmured, his voice hollow. She does like marketing work for small shops, freelance stuff." I placed my glass down gently on the mantel, turned to face the room, and said evenly, "Actually, Crestview Strategies is a global acquisitions and restructuring firm. As of yesterday, we hold the controlling stake in Altair." The truth finally dropped loud, heavy, and impossible to ignore. While Blake had been performing for a captive family audience, I'd been negotiating billion-dollar deals behind closed doors. While they were sharing stories over hors d'oeuvres, I was quietly building an empire that now included Blake's entire division. Michael continued, as if offering a toast. "Miss Whitaker's acquisition team was one of the sharpest I've worked with. The structure, timing, and strategy behind the Altair buyout masterful." He turned toward Blake. "Your cousin isn't just running a firm. She's one of the most strategic minds I've encountered." Color drained from Blake's face. He looked around the room for support, for someone to step in and explain how this couldn't be happening. This has to be some kind of mistake," he said quietly. "Rachel doesn't. She can't. What I said, softly, stepping closer. "Can't lead a billion-dollar firm, can't outmaneuver a legacy board, can't be more than the cousin who once quit her job with a laptop and a dream." Nobody answered. Not this time. Because they knew. And for the first time in years, they were finally seeing me, not as the girl who didn't follow the path they approved of, but as the woman who built something undeniable without needing anyone's applause. When the truth finally came out, it didn't roar, it echoed. Blake stood frozen in place, his bourbon glass hanging slack in his fingers. The smugness that had defined his every word that evening had drained away, replaced by something I hadn't seen on him since we were kids, raw disbelief. "I don't understand," he said, barely above a whisper. "You can't just buy Altair Digital." I tilted my head, the corners of my mouth lifting just slightly. "Why not you? You run a small consulting business," he said, still clinging to the story he'd told himself for years. "You work with like Etsy shops and yoga studios." I took a deep breath and turned to face the rest of the room. All eyes were on me now. Relatives, in-laws, family, friends, every one of them suddenly very interested in what I had to say. Actually, I began, my voice clear and steady. Crestview Strategies is a global acquisitions and restructuring firm. We manage just over $12 billion in assets. We've acquired 17 companies in the past 3 years. I let the words hang in the air for a moment. And yesterday, we finalized our controlling stake in Altair Digital. Aunt Caroline's hand flew to her chest. Someone near the fireplace dropped a cookie tray with a clatter. My mother, who had been trying to blend into the background, looked like she might faint. Blake's face contorted, his mind visibly racing to rewrite every interaction we'd had in the past decade. "You've been sitting on this," he snapped. "All this time, why didn't you ever say anything?" I met his gaze. Would it have mattered? The silence that followed was louder than any outburst. "I remember last Christmas," I said calmly, addressing the room now, "when Blake made a joke about my little internet hobby, and you all laughed like it was cute. Or the year before, when Uncle Mike suggested I take a few community college courses to get back on track." Uncle Mike winced. A few cousins looked away. "The truth is, I didn't need to say anything," I continued. "Because while you were all busy measuring success in titles and job security, I was building something bigger than any of you imagined." Michael Liu, still standing beside me, gave a respectful nod. "And she did it with precision," he added. "The way Rachel's team structured the buyout was nothing short of brilliant. She didn't just purchase a company, she reshaped an industry play." Blake's lips parted as if to argue, but no sound came out. He looked down at the floor like he was hoping it would open and swallow him whole. "And Blake," I added, my tone softer but still firm, "we'll need to talk about your role at Altair. Some organizational changes are coming." The color returned to his face, but this time it was red. "You can't do this," he said, stepping closer, voice trembling. "You can't just walk in and take everything." "I'm not taking anything," I said quietly. "I earned it. While you were busy performing for every family gathering, I was negotiating multi-billion-dollar deals across 3 continents." The entire room was still, and for the first time in my life, they were truly seeing me. Not as a charity case, not as a freelancer with a pipe dream, not even as Blake's cousin, but as the woman who now owned the company he thought he was about to run. The hallway leading to the study felt longer than usual, or maybe it was just the weight of everything Blake had to swallow. He trailed behind me silent, except for the hurried tap of his Italian loafers against Aunt Caroline's polished hardwood floors. The same Blake, who had dominated every room his whole life, now looked like a man unraveling. The door closed behind us with a soft click. He spun around, jaw tight, voice low but sharp. "How long have you been planning this?" I walked calmly across the room, taking a seat in the leather chair, behind the grand mahogany desk, his desk, the one he bragged about year after year, his little kingdom, his symbol of power. "Not everything is about you, Blake," I said, folding my hands. "Crestview's been analyzing Altair Digital for almost 4 years. The fact that you worked there, just a coincidence." "Coincidence," He repeated, a bitter laugh escaping his throat. You expect me to believe that this is a power grab. You've always hated that I was ahead. I raised an eyebrow. Ahead? You mean when I was building a global firm and you were pitching outdated strategies in board meetings? He didn't answer. Instead, he stared out the window like the trees could offer him an escape route. Without another word, I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and turned the screen toward him. His eyes locked onto the number. That can't be real, he whispered. It's just the liquid portion of my personal net worth. I said, my tone calm. Crestview is worth significantly more. Blake's shoulders sagged. He dropped into the guest chair like the air had been knocked out of him. The arrogant posture was gone. Now he looked like a man who just realized the map he'd been following didn't lead to where he thought. Why didn't you ever say anything? He asked, voice suddenly small. All those years, I thought. I tilted my head. You thought I was struggling, that I was lost, that you were winning. You never asked. You never cared. You just assumed. His face turned pale. I remember last year, he said quietly. I told everyone you probably couldn't afford to fly home for Dad's birthday, that you were embarrassed. I wasn't, I replied. I was in Singapore, negotiating the Turner acquisition, $2.8 billion. He buried his face in his hands. The Turner deal. That was you, he asked, his voice hoarse. The Madison merger, Carson buyout, all Crestview, I said. You mocked a firm that owns your entire division. He didn't speak for a moment. I reached into my tote bag, pulled out a navy folder, and laid it on the desk. What's that, he asked. Your future, I replied. Blake, under Crestview's leadership standards, are going to shift. And frankly, your performance reviews are full of red flags. That's just industry noise, he snapped. Everyone cuts corners. You're overreacting. No, I said firmly. I'm correcting, and you have a choice. I turned the folder toward him. You can take a lateral transfer to our Minneapolis branch. Same pay, no promotion, fresh start. Or I paused. You can resign. We'll offer a 3-month severance package. Blake's mouth opened and closed like he couldn't find the words. Minneapolis. But my life is here. My condo, my golf club, your inflated sense of importance, I offered. You'll lose all that, but you'll keep your job, your choice. He stared at the paper. His fingers trembled. Then he whispered, This is cruel. I stood. No, I said, walking toward the door. Mocking my firm, every Christmas was cruel. Laughing at my ambition was cruel. Offering me an assistant job last year, that was cruel. His face crumpled, but I didn't stop. I opened the door and turned back one last time. You have until New Year's to decide. Then I added with a faint smile, Oh, and that corner office you love, I'm turning it into a wellness lounge. When I stepped back into the living room, it was like walking into a theater mid-act, only now the entire cast had forgotten their lines. Conversation stumbled to a halt. Eyes darted toward me with a new kind of awareness, like I'd been an extra in their holiday script for years, and suddenly I'd been cast as the lead. My mother was the first to move, rising from the fireplace hearth, where she sat beside Aunt Caroline and Uncle Hank. Her arms opened for a hug. Rachel, sweetheart, she said in a breathy rush, we had no idea. All this time. And you've been so successful. Why didn't you tell us? I took a measured step back from her embrace. I wasn't angry. I was just tired. Would it have made a difference, Mom? I asked, keeping my voice gentle. If I had told you earlier when it wasn't flashy, when there wasn't a headline or a CEO shaking my hand in your foyer? Of course it would have, she said too quickly, glancing around for confirmation. We're your family. No, I said calmly, correcting her. You're people who share my last name. I looked around the room at the same faces that had smiled politely for years while dismissing everything I was building. Family supports without proof. They don't wait until success makes sense to them. My father cleared his throat and stepped closer, his expression a careful blend of regret and forced optimism. "Rachel, I think we may have misjudged some things," he said, "but we always wanted what was best for you." "Did you?" I asked, locking eyes with him. "Or did you want what looked best to your tennis club circle?" The words landed with the weight of a dropped curtain. For once, no one had a snappy comeback. At that moment, Michael Liu walked up behind me, holding his coat over one arm. "Miss Whitaker," he said with a courteous smile, "I'll be heading out now. We've got a full schedule tomorrow." "Of course," I replied, returning the smile. "My team will have the integration docs on your desk by 9. As he walked away, I heard my mother whisper to Aunt Caroline, "Did you hear that she has a team?" I nearly laughed. Now they were proud. Now they were curious. Now that my accomplishments were loud enough for their social circles to hear, they finally wanted to listen. But I wasn't doing this for applause. I never had. A few minutes later, Blake reemerged from the hallway, looking dazed, like someone who'd just woken up in the wrong decade. He shuffled to the bar and poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon. His hand trembled as he set the bottle down. The moment his glass hit the counter, a small swarm of cousins and uncles circled around him like vultures to a wounded lion asking questions he couldn't possibly answer now. For once, Blake had nothing to say. I slipped on my coat, grabbed my clutch, and made my way toward the door. I hadn't planned to reveal everything tonight. Certainly not in front of crystal chandeliers and canapes. But maybe it was better this way. It was clean, final, undeniable. "Leaving already?" my father called from behind. "But we've barely had a chance to talk. You must tell us more about your firm," my mother chimed in. "Your acquisitions, your team." I glanced at my watch. "I've got a 6 a.m. flight to London. Board meeting with a potential new acquisition. But it's Christmas," she cried. I looked at her and smiled, not bitterly, but with the clarity of someone who no longer needed validation. "Yes," I said, "and for the first time you all truly understand why I won't be here." Then I turned back to the door, leaving behind the sound of clinking glasses and shifting narratives. As I drove down Aunt Caroline's long, oak-lined driveway, my phone buzzed with texts from cousins I hadn't heard from in years. "Congratulations. So proud of you. We always knew you had it in you." "Let's catch up soon." I deleted every single one of them. They say success is the best revenge, but that's not true. Revenge implies you needed their validation in the first place. I didn't, and I never will. 3 months later, Blake quietly accepted the Minneapolis transfer. My parents, now glowing with pride, introduced me as their visionary entrepreneur daughter. Skipping the years, they suggested I get a receptionist certificate. And me, I just closed the acquisition of a modest tech firm in Savannah. It was called Preston Dynamics, my father's retirement project, the company he once hoped Blake would lead. I had my assistant send over the ownership letter. No speech. No, "I told you so." Just one line at the top, "From the desk of your tiny firm's owner." We often wait for permission to feel proud to speak up, to take our place at the table. But real strength is built in the quiet, when no one's clapping, when no one's watching. The truth. You don't need their approval. Your value isn't measured by applause. It's measured by resilience, vision, and grace under pressure. To anyone who's been underestimated, keep building. Let your silence echo louder than their doubt. Now it's your turn. Have you ever been overlooked or underestimated by family, coworkers, or even yourself? How did you rise above it? Drop your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it. And if you believe in quiet strength and long game victories, subscribe to the channel. This space is for every underdog, every late bloomer, and every dreamer who dared to keep going. We're not done yet. We're just getting started.